Roxbury, Cedar Street, night. Three wild dogs slink along the wet black streets of this Boston ghetto. The houses are one family frame and brick and lit, emitting faint sounds of television. Cars are parked at the curb. A row of shops lines one side of the street, and on the corner is a bar with a neon sign. The rain has almost stopped, but men still wait, lounging in the doorway of the bar. One of them throws an empty beer can at the dogs. The can misses, clanks tinnily on the street. The dogs barely notice. They pad softly past the row of storefronts, almost disappearing after about 30 yards. Into the darkness behind them, a form slips out from a recessed storefront and trots along after the dogs. It is the creature last seen clubbing Sergeant Obispo. Roxbury, another street, night. This area is burned out. The occasional 6-story tenement with smashed, gaping black windows stands opposite demolished rubble. The three dogs pick and slink their way across the expanse. Keeping a distance behind them, Jessup lopes along. He pauses to pick up a piece of jagged brick. A surreal scene in the derelict heart of the city. A hunt for prey. Blue Hill Avenue, Franklin Park Zoo. Mist. On the west side of the street, the high iron fence of Franklin Park Zoo opposite a row of small apartment houses. Jessup, his fine fur soaked through, holds his club and a piece of brick, hearing the trills and croaks of birds. The dogs on the other side of the street are marauding garbage cans and plastic trash bags, sniffing up alleys and down basement steps in search of rats. A small snarling flurry among the dogs indicates a fight over something. It's over in seconds. A car whisks by, its windshield wipers stroking back and forth. The dogs slink over to the zoo side of the street. Jessup watches them, filthy, skulking animals. Alert, Jessup doesn't move a muscle. They are 20 yards south of him, poking about for a hole in the zoo's fence. One suddenly wheels toward Jessup, baring its teeth, its yellow eyes wide. The other dogs snarl softly, turn their heads toward the curious little ape-like creature. With a shrill shriek, Jessup dashes at the dogs, brandishing stick and stone. They scatter, slink back, keeping their distance. His cry rouses the birds in the zoo as a fluttering of distant wings and bird calls signal danger to the caged animals. The lead dog, a mongrel mastiff with white markings on its brow, growls softly, pads into the street, moving up on Jessup's flank. Jessup watches him warily, responding with a snarl of his own. The mongrel leaps at Jessup's throat. Jessup batters at the red-tongued maw. Two other dogs lunge in. Jessup wheels on them, shrieking with fury, smashing at them with his club and a brick. A screeching of tires on the wet pavement. A car, headlights blazing, veers around the corner, dispersing the dogs and disappearing up the street. Silence. Then the dogs slink back to continue the feral battle. But the ape-like creature is gone. They soon spot him again, squatting on the stonework that forms the top of the fence. Ape-like, he taunts the dogs. He soon tires of it and with agility climbs down on the zoo's side. The zoo. Night. Jessup finds himself on grass and ground. The streetlights of Blue Hill Avenue spill over enough to let Jessup see bushes and trees. He grunts with pleasure at this familiar terrain. He can see a low wattled fence and grass receding into darkness and silence. The zoo is on the crest of the slope is a red glow. Jessup stands stock still, listening for the distant burr of a crane. He moves forward, finding himself on a walkway. Puzzled by the hard feel beneath his feet, he follows the path for a ways, until he sees water, the wildfowl pond glistening blackly. The air hangs heavy and fetid with animal smells, the silence weighted by the massive sensation of sleep. He moves further, cutting between trees and bushes until he reaches an open area and is startled by the abrupt stone building, rearing up and made visible by the light-colored stone. Further along he sees the red glow again off to the right and slips softly in that direction. What he sees are a building's nightlights given a red hue by the tinted windows. The small mammals building. He approaches the low stone building stretching around him in a soft red haze. He peers inside. Jessup's POV. An empty hallway bathed in a soft red light cast over cages of mice, porcupines, sloths, and shrews, curled up in balls of furry sleep. An occasional slithering movement heads toward a watering trough. All of it is incomprehensible to Jessup. He is quickly bored. The zoo, another section. Jessup makes his way around empty round cages with thick iron bars, the Great Apes building, and down macadam paths lined with protective railings. He hears the croaking burr of a crane much closer. He freezes, waits, listens. To his left, a stone outcropping is barely discernible in a fenced area for the giraffes. Suddenly, behind him to the right, he senses movement and a crowned crane prances into his vision. It is sufficiently lit to be recognized by the glistening red and white spots on its face and straw-colored topknot of feathers. It stares blankly out of its button eyes, turns and disappears. Jessup stands staring back at it with his club and a bit of brick. Reaching the low wooden fence, he squints into the darkness, trying to see the crane again. It's gone. He moves on. The zoo, the African plains. Jessup stands in front of a 4-foot hedgerow used to disguise a wooden fence enclosing this section of the park. The dark is impenetrable, but he hears sounds of East African grasslands, movements of animals, the startled flurry of veering herds. Forcing his way through the bramble of hedgerow, he crawls beneath the horizontal poles of the fence. He soon finds himself on the edge of a shallow moat, some 4 feet deep and 10 feet wide. The spill of streetlight from Seaver Street allows Jessup to make out that he is on high ground with a tract of savanna stretching out before him. At the bottom of the slope, he can see a waterhole. On his right is a sparse woodland and a group of sleeping blesboks. He grunts with pleasure. Letting himself down into the moat, as high as he is tall, he moves along until he finds an overhanging limb to pull himself up onto the other side. Landing on a small stone outcrop, he startles a herd of some 40 mouflon huddled for the night near the wooden palisade of their paddock. The herd of sheep skews madly into the open grass. Jessup stands stock still, holding his club and a brick, waiting for his presence to become part of this world. Silence. At a waterhole on his left, a single hartebeest humps forward, lapping quietly at the water. Through the wet grass, Jessup heads for the end of the water hole furthest from the hartebeest. Pausing at the edge, he tries to sense the presence of other predators. The hartebeest raises its head, watches him, prepared to bolt. Jessup gets down on his knees and begins to lap the water. The hartebeest returns to its own drinking. We watch the two animals sharing the water hole, each drinking warily. From a dark slope, Jessup watches the herd of mouflon huddled in a sparse little grove about 20 yards away. They're edgy, trembling even as they sleep. A skittish few on the periphery of the flock flit here and there like butterflies. The zoo sleeps. Nothing moves anywhere. The air is heavy and wet. He waits. A flicker of movement in the herd. A lamb bounds away, rejoins the herd. 3 sheep run, whirl, fluttering shadows of movement followed by silence. Jessup waits. In one hand he holds his club and bit of brick. In the other are 2 round stones that he suddenly pitches into the trees where the herd lies. With the first rustle of the leaves, the herd explodes, dementedly scattering. Half a dozen leap and skitter past Jessup. He takes after them with a shriek, driving their agitated wild shadows before him past the waterhole straight for the moat. At the lip of the moat, all but one veer and shoot off into the safety of darkness. The one tries to leap the chasm. It falls in a heap to the bottom of the moat, crippled. Jessup jumps after it, and with a single stroke of his club, smashes the animal's skull. The zoo. The moat. Jessup scrapes away the sheep's hide with his jagged chip of brick, stripping a good-sized piece off its haunch. He pauses, looks up, sensing danger. A low growl can be heard not far away. He stands, picks up his kill by a leg, and moves softly, quickly up the wide, dark moat until he finds an overhanging branch. He places the sheep carcass on the lip of the moat and hauls himself up to it. He picks up his club and brick, checks the terrain, and squats down, raising the carcass to his face, clamps his teeth into the hot, bloody flesh. He twists his head back and forth, wrenching the gobbet of flesh free. He chews at it, then looks up, again sensing danger. Led by the mastiff with the white markings, the 3 dogs are moving up the slope from the waterhole. These lumps of black movement in the black grass halt a few yards from him, growling. Jessup makes a noise of his own and brandishes his club. They keep away. Camera pulls back for the image of Jessup squatting in the grass, eating the sheep in the night with a sullen satisfaction, keeping the snarling dogs at bay. A primal animal at one with his elemental world. The zoo. Night. 2 a.m. In the clear moonlight, a jeep crawls along the pathways, parking the lights on. A zoo security guard on night duty spots some movement on the African plains. He stops, lets the jeep idle, gets out and peers over the wire fence enclosing the area. Across the guard looking up the slope, something is going on. The rain is long over, the moon bright. From here it looks like the 3 dogs are ravening at something. The guard climbs over the fence and starts up the slope, drawing his revolver. The dogs see him and scatter. He moves in to see what they were eating. The remains of the mouflon. The guard looks to see if the dogs are still skulking around. They are gone. but the guard's eye is caught by a white blur in the dark grass some 20 yards away under a tree. He cocks his gun and moves cautiously. It is a naked man. It is Jessup, sleeping, his chest rising and falling evenly. There is a beatific smile on his face. Franklin Park Precinct, Squad Room, 3:30 a.m. In the typical old battered police station house, a cop brings Jessup out of the bowels of the building, dressed and carrying an empty overnight bag that he hands to Emily, who, along with Parrish, has been anxiously waiting for him. Jessup, see what you can do about getting me out of here. Emily, it's all done. Mason has his car outside. Outside the precinct station, night. Jessup is getting into the front passenger seat. Jessup, vague, stunned. I'd like to stop by the medical school. I left all my clothes in the tank room. Emily, sliding into the car beside him. Let's just get you home. It's 3:30 in the morning. Jessup, I have my watch and my wallet there. My keys are there. I'll need them to get in the apartment. Emily, I've got my keys. I had to stop off to get you to some clothes. Parrish, sliding behind the wheel. I'll go back and get your stuff later. Parrish starts the motor and they move off. Parrish's car en route, night. Emily glances surreptitiously at her husband sitting between her and Parrish. He seems to be in a state of shock, distracted, oddly placid, lobotomized as he stares through the windshield, almost unaware of her or Parrish. Emily, what were you doing in the He doesn't seem to hear her. Do you remember anything at all about last night? Jessup, staring at her blankly for a moment. I remember large fragments of what happened, but not all of it. You'll have to be patient with me. He turns back to stare out the windshield again. Emily, I've had Mason looking all over Boston for you all night. She lets her head sink onto his chest and cries. Jessup murmurs into her hair. It's okay. I'm all right. Jessup's apartment, kitchen, night. Emily sits at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and nibbling at cookies from a box. She looks up as Jessup enters, swathed in a towel robe, patting himself dry. He makes himself a cup of instant coffee. He seems in a very good mood, excited, exhilarated. Jessup, affably. I suppose getting a call from the police at 3 o'clock in the morning to the effect your husband has been found sleeping naked in the city zoo might have caused you some concern. Emily. Yes, I think you could say that. Jessup. And Mason's been writing you all this time telling you I'm having a nervous breakdown. And you figured I finally flipped out altogether. He sits across from her and begins to say something. He laughs, a full, open, exuberant laugh. After a bit, he wipes his eyes. Jessup. I'm sorry, Emily. Forgive me. I know what a harrowing day I've caused you. I'm sure you've been sitting here all this time while trying to figure out how to get me to a psychiatrist. Emily. As a matter of fact, I have. Jessup. I don't know how you put up with me all these years. Emily. I loved you. He stands, cries out in exultation. Jessup. Oh my God, Emily. I don't know how to tell you this. I really don't. Bear with me, Emily. The implications are staggering. He strides off into the living room. She follows to the doorway. The living room. Night. He is moving erratically around the room, so exhilarated that his arms and legs seem out of control. Jessup, trying to keep his voice calm. I don't remember all of it. Apparently, I entered a very primitive consciousness, and all I can remember of last night is what was comprehensible to that consciousness. I don't remember, at least not clearly, how I got out of the tank room. The first thing I remember are the dogs. I followed a pack of wild dogs to the zoo. That's how I got there. In the zoo, I hunted down and ate a small sheep. I was utterly primal. I consisted of nothing more than the will to survive, to live through the night, to eat, to drink, to sleep. It was the most supremely satisfying time of my life. He is up again, moving around the room in a gathering frenzy of creativity. On a strictly psychological level, I suspect we achieved an observable momentum at enough nuclear locations to alter the actual form. The drug probably affects the bonding. But even if we could establish a biochemical setting for this, so what? Suppose we get some cells, crack them open, get some assays. Okay, so we get all kinds of whacked out polyribosomal profiles. Fantastic enzymatic activity. I'm making protein at an unbelievable pace. I mean, let's face it, this whole thing is biologically impossible. We're not just talking about one cell or even a colony of cells going wild. We're talking about a massive mutation of my entire biological system. A process that took millions of years to evolve, reversing itself in a matter of hours, if not moments. Some extraordinary transfer of energy has occurred. We may be into some kind of exotic relativistic physics in which consciousness snapped me into some new sharp attribute. Don't we have a physicist in our circle of friends? I'd like to bounce this off a quantum guy. Because, you see, Emily, what I think happened is I somehow got into a quantum state where there is no matter, only the potential of matter. It makes sense, doesn't it? Some original and universal state of energy potential. I somehow tapped into that original consciousness of pure potential. My God, what an implacably beautiful thought. He stands glowing, radiant, frozen by his vision, his eyes closed, staring into eternity, his face as mask-like as an icon's. Jessup. It must be true. Anything that beautiful must be true. He doesn't even know she's in the room anymore. He sighs as if in sexual consummation and sinks into the embrace of the soft chair. Emily, you still haven't told me what happened tonight. He sprawls in the chair, seeming to be almost asleep. Jessup. After I left you this afternoon, I went to the isolation tank room, took 200 milligrams of the stuff, got into the tank, and at some point during the evening I transformed my matter into some form of early human life. The doorbell rings. Emily. That must be Mason. She sits frightened by the madness she has just heard. The doorbell rings again. Emily stands, starts for the door. Jessup, I may have killed a man tonight, or damn near killed him. I remember beating somebody bloody. Emily pauses at the door, sighs, then opens it. Parrish booms into the room, carrying Jessup's clothing over his arm. Parrish, man, you don't know the trouble I had getting these clothes. I had to go to the security office for them. They want you to call them right now. There was some kind of ape in your isolation tank room tonight. Do you know anything about that? This ape almost killed a security guard. You didn't bring an ape down to the tank room tonight, did you? Your watch and stuff are in the jacket pocket. Dumps the clothing on a chair, senses something is wrong. Is everything all right? Is he okay? Emily, if he's okay, the rest of us are in a lot of trouble. Pauses as she moves toward the kitchen. Tell Mason what you've been telling me. I'd like to hear Mason's views on all this. Jessup, I think Mason's views will be predictable. Emily's house, front porch, Sunday, day. It is 2 days later, a pleasant Sunday afternoon in April. Emily, Parrish, the Rosenbergs all lounge on the porch. Sylvia is nursing an infant. The Jessup kids and the Rosenberg boy can be seen in the background. Parrish's predictable views are being expounded by him at the moment. Parrish to Rosenberg. He wigged out, had a toxic delirium, ran around the streets of Boston naked, and wound up sleeping in the zoo. This is hardly the first instance of drug-induced delirium any of us have heard of. Emily. What worries me is he actually believes his hallucination. I mean, he actually thinks he turned into an ape man. He can't tell hallucination from reality anymore. Parrish. As for that strange ape they found in the tank room that night, I'm sure it'll turn out to be some local kid who broke in to steal some drugs or something like that. Emily. I called him yesterday morning and last night, and I spoke to him this morning again. He sounds absolutely fine. He's going over to MIT to brainstorm with some physicists on Wednesday. I told him he ought to spend some time with the kids. He hasn't seen them in a year. They've been asking for him. This has got to be the most hideous weekend I ever lived. I'm still not unpacked. My husband has had a breakdown, and do you know the only thing I can think about right now is I've got to place the kids in a school tomorrow morning. Parrish. And now he wants to do it again, and he wants us to watch him. Emily. For God's sake, you're not going to let him do it again. Rosenberg. How do you plan to stop him? Listen, if you're worried about his flipping out again, we can always bring him down with a little benzodiazepine. But the point is, there's no way we're going to talk him out of going into that tank again. He's going to do it with us or without us, and I think it'd be a hell of a lot better if he was with us. The point is arguable. Parrish to Emily. When are you going to look over his data? Emily. Thursday, while he's with the kids. Jessup's apartment, living room, day. Emily reads a sheaf of papers. The blood analysis reports from the Goodman labs. Jessup's notebooks, x-rays, and stacks of audio cassettes are stacked on the coffee table in front of her as she sits on the sofa. There is a tape playing of Jessup's aphasic experience. Jessup's voice on cassette. He's beating me with his chunk of lava. He's gouging gobbets of me with his chunk of lava. Rosenberg's voice on cassette. Are you okay, Eddie? Jessup's voice on cassette. No pain. No pain, I tell you, no pain. We can see that Emily is not actually reading, but has been caught by the theatricality of the Jessup's voice on cassette. He's devouring me, ripping my flesh. Of course, it's me. It's my primordial me devouring me. I'm returning to my original me. Unbelievable sensation. Ineffable. Beatitude. Absolutely transcendental. I'm it, and it's me. I'm the hunter now. I'm the killer. I'm killing. I'm eating the blood-hot flesh of a giant goat. I'm eating a goat I just killed. I'm eating a goat. Jessup's voice breaks into a croak and some clicking noises, then a howl. Emily lets the tape run just long enough to know there's nothing more. She quickly rewinds and plays the grunts and clicking sounds and howl again. She rewinds yet again, plays it, listens with the most intense interest. McDonald's restaurant, night, 9:30 p.m. The Jessups seem to be a typical American family among a large dining room of typical American families. It's late. Emily and Jessup are down to their coffee, and Margaret is cranky and whining, and Jessup has to hold her. He is talking, and Emily is fascinated. Jessup. Physicists see the whole thing in terms of particles and energy states. You get situations in particle physics where you have something in one state and then suddenly you'll find it appearing in another state. It has apparently zipped through a forbidden region between the states. What I may have done is reduce my uncertainty in energy to zero, or near enough to zero, so that the time available to me to tunnel through had been infinite. In background, Grace, who has been roaming around the restaurant, falls and cries. Jessup rises and gets her without letting it stop the flow of ideas he's trying to communicate. Jessup. Where I differ from the physicists is they conceive of consciousness as a particular force exerted by a particular person. I see it as a cosmic, perhaps the cosmic force. Our universe exploded into being some 20 billion years ago. A fantastic explosion of hydrogen. So it all began with an actual act of creation. What did the creating? That original creative force is what I call consciousness. You can call it God if you like, but there's a difference. Consciousness is not a noumenal process. It's phenomenological. It's phenomenological. It can be reached, tapped, manipulated. Lord knows I believe I tapped into it. Emily, I think I better get the kids home. She gets the sleepy kids jacketed and on their way. Jessup watches her movements, her saucy ass, the long legs, her natural physical sensuality. Jessup, I'd like to go home with you tonight. Would that be all right with you? She pauses, turns, smiles at him. Emily, do you know, I think that's exactly what you said to me the first night we met. Do you remember? In Arthur and Sylvia's apartment back in New York? Jessup, yes. And you said we'd have to make do with the couch. The couch is still okay with me. Emily, I've finally made my peace with this divorce, Eddie. It's been a very painful year for me. And I think it would be dumb to reintroduce sex between us. So, Thank you for what really has been a fascinating day. I'll drop you off. Emily's apartment, her bedroom, night. Emily is asleep. Suddenly, she sits bolt upright, propelled out of her sleep by an insufferable nightmare. For the terror lingers in her eyes. After a moment, she lies back again, but her eyes are open. There is no more sleep for her now. She sits, swings her legs over, and slumps there in her pajamas, trying to subdue her fear. She looks at her watch on the bed table, goes out into and down to the door of her kids' room. She watches them sleep, then heads back down the hallway to the living room, where she slumps into a chair. But she is immediately up again, wandering around the dark room, distraught. Finally, she goes to the phone and dials. Emily, on phone. Did I wake you? It's Emily. Eddie, I'm in kind of a wild panic. I need to talk to you. Outside Emily's house, night. Jessup's Toyota pulls into the driveway. He gets out, cuts across the lawn to the porch, up the stoop to where Emily is waiting for him. They go into the foyer. The lamplight from the living room spills into the darkness. Emily. I don't even know how to put this into words, but I'm beginning to think that what happened to you last Friday night was not just a hallucinatory experience. I've got this gut feeling something phenomenological did actually happen, that there was some kind of genetic transformation. I don't know why I think that in defiance of all rationality, but I do. And now that I do, I'm terrified. I mean, really terrified, petrified. Jessup. So am I. Emily. As soon as she closes the door. I don't want you doing this experiment again next week. Jessup. We've got to find out if it actually happened, Emily. They moved to the threshold of the shadowy living room. Emily. I'm suggesting that you put the experiment off until we understand a little more in order to minimize the risk. Jessup. There is no way we can understand this before the event. We can only work back from the event itself. Emily. You may be causing yourself irreversible genetic damage. Jessup. I don't think we're dealing with genetics. We're beyond mass and matter here, beyond even energy. What we're back to is the first thought. Emily. Something monstrous is going to happen. Jessup. All our evidence indicates nothing irreversible is going to happen. None of my experiences have lasted longer than 4 hours, and I have always reconstituted completely. Emily. I'm trying to tell you that I love you. Jessup. I know that. And I'm trying to tell you this is an all bets are off sort of thing. We may be opening a black box that could scrap out a whole picture of space-time. We might even have a link to another universe. For God's sake, Emily, you're a scientist. You know how I feel. And of course she does. Emily sighs. Yes, I know how you feel. It's very late, Eddie. Would you like to stay here tonight? I could do with a little love and a little reassurance right now. You'll stay, won't you? Emily's house, Friday, April 30th, 7:30 p.m. Stormy. The rain and thunder create a befittingly gothic night. Thunder rumbles. Rain lashes through the streets. Lightning bleaches the scene. Emily comes out of her house in a raincoat with an umbrella and braves her way to the car. Medical school B building, basement, night. Emily comes in through the exit door at the end of the corridor, shaking her umbrella out. Corridor to the tank room. She heads up the corridor to the tank room. There is considerable traffic of hospital personnel on such a rainy night, all going about their individual duties. Emily turns into the observation room. Rosenberg stands beside an examining table with an attached IV stand, loading it. On the examining table, there are a narrow tray, a biopsy tray, a prep kit, a 35mm Nikon and a videotape setup, camera, and console, along with 2 gooseneck standing lamps. Through the window, we see Parrish by the isolation tank talking to Jessup. He smiles at her. She responds with a nervous smile of her own. Rosenberg indicates the IV. If it happens, we'll give him a big bolus of Amtol for starters. Emily, raw nerves exploding. What do you mean if it happens? If it happens? Everybody keeps saying if it happens. Do you think something's going to happen, Arthur? Because if you do, then I think... I'm sorry, Arthur. I'm nervous as hell. Rosenberg, listen, so am I. She goes into the tank room, night. In the subdued lighting, Parrish is by the uncovered tank, staring down into the water as Jessup is taking off his clothes. Jessup to Parrish. If I come out of that tank anthropoid, I'll be in a very primitive consciousness and impossible to relate to. So sedate me while I'm still in the tank. Otherwise, you'll have to chase me around and subdue me. Parrish. Okay. Jessup goes into the observation room to continue undressing. Emily comes down to examine the tank, seeing it for the first time. Parrish. I'll tell you this. If he comes out of that tank looking like an ape, I'm going straight over to Mass Mental and commit myself. Isolation tank room, observation room, night. Emily sits with Parrish, lighting up a cigarette. Rosenberg enters with a brown paper bag. Rosenberg. Anything happen? Parrish shakes his head. I just checked him 10 minutes ago. Rosenberg has apparently come from the local deli and unloads coffee and sandwiches in Danish. Emily abruptly goes into the tank room, where she goes down to the tank, lifts the hinged headpiece, looks in. Emily's POV. From deep within the square blackness exposed by the open lid, Jessup's white face stares blankly out, framed, cadaverous, like a plaster cast sunk into a cushion of blackness. Medical school B building corridor. Several hours later, Emily is manifestly agitated and walks aimlessly about the corridor smoking. She looks at her watch, crushes out the cigarette, returns to isolation tank room, observation room, where Parrish is cleaning up the mess from the deli, gathering half-eaten sandwiches, empty containers, etc., into a brown paper bag. Rosenberg is reading a mystery novel. Emily, no longer able to contain herself. Look, I've got nearly 10. That's more than 2 hours now. Is there any way we can stop this? I tell you frankly, I'm really frightened. We could be screwing around with his whole genetic structure. How do we stop this? Hallucinatory blip. A white-orange jagged flame shears diagonally across the entire length of the screen, seeming to rip it in half. The same jagged crack that occurred in Jessup's Mexican hallucination. Neither Emily, Rosenberg, nor Parrish seems aware of this extraordinary invasion of their reality. Parrish, can you bring him down, Arthur? Rosenberg, he's gonna be sore as hell. Emily, in full-fledged panic. We never should have let him do it. How did we let him talk us into this? We were humoring him, but we know he's not crazy. And we all know deep in our hearts he may be onto something that is beyond our own comprehension. Because I believe him, I want this stopped. Sudden hallucinatory blip. Out of a sable sea, an enormous volcanic cone of rock surges up, erupting with flame and boiling rock. Hundreds of tons of plutonic explosion. A fantastic fountain of rock and scalding water rising 2,000 feet into the air. Again, the others seem unaware that they are being invaded. Rosenberg clicking on the mic. How are we doing, Eddie? He waits for a response. There is none. Emily. Oh, Jesus. Hallucinatory image. An explosion. A shattering flash of brilliant whiteness fills the screen. Emily, Rosenberg, and Parrish are made almost invisible, bleached out. We see just enough of Emily to realize she is slowly becoming aware of the reality of her husband's hallucination. A high-pitched, screaming drone of energy. We are back to the reality of the observation room again, except that waves of different colors pulsate and throb across the screen. Neither Rosenberg nor Parrish are aware of this, but Emily is staring blindly ahead, seeing and hearing it all. The scream abruptly stops. Suddenly, over the speaker on the top shelf, we hear a rasping kind of grunt and a series of clicking sounds. Emily turns to the two men, her face in panic, and pleads. Emily, almost screaming, "Please." Parrish unwinds himself from his sprawled position, gets up, and goes to the tank room, where he moves to the tank and lifts the headpiece. Parrish looks down into the tank, this time into the sleeping mask of a somewhat gorilla-like face, its skin a black and shining hide. The close-cropped scalp extends down almost to the heavy simian ridge, bulging slightly across the brow. The facial fur is finer than that found on apes and does not entirely cover the ears. The lower jaw is prognathic, the lips extended and open, revealing strong yellow but very human teeth. The eyes, even closed, are more human than ape-like, larger and not sunk into deep sockets. The neck, shoulders, and part of the chest visible are all covered with a fine short fur. Reaction shot shows Parrish sighing for lack of any other reaction. Parrish to himself. There is no way, no how, that this can be explained on any physical level. Raises his voice but maintains a calm. Have you got your needle ready, Arthur? He said to nail him while he was still in the tank. A moment later, the door opens and Rosenberg is framed in the bright light. Rosenberg, nervous. What do you mean? The eyelids of the creature open slowly, revealing malevolent little red eyes. Parrish, seeing this in the tank. God damn it, Arthur, bring your goddamn syringe over here. Observation room. Night. Emily stands at the one-way window, peering into the tank room, and reaches over to hand Rosenberg his airline bag. Hold on Emily long enough to see tears streaming down her face. Tank room. Unzipping his bag, Rosenberg joins Parrish at the tank, stops, and stares in astonishment at the proto-human face looking back at him. Rosenberg, babbling. How do we define this? I mean, There is no coherent schemata for this. We need a whole new language. Holy God Almighty, we need a whole new space-time picture. Abruptly, he stops as a penetrating droning sound emanates from somewhere about them. He and Parrish look around with a growing terror as they face a line of blue light moving across the increasingly darkening room toward them. Swiftly, the blue light sweeps through the tank in shockwaves, and the four walls of the tank fly apart, as if a nuclear blast had been detonated inside of it. Both Parrish and Rosenberg are flung against the walls of the room. The water geysers to the ceiling in a screaming mushroom cloud, crashing with a clap as loud as thunder, and then floods the room ankle deep. Infrared waves of light sweep back and forth across the room, accumulating in intensity to oranges and yellows that seem hotter than the sun, and the whole of the tank room flares, molten with heat. The observation room. Emily is stupefied. Her POV, where the tank had been, is a pulsating white mass rising out of the thin layer of boiling water. This grotesque, unformed, white thing has been gouged, revealing a skeletal structure underneath. Emily screams in terror. She lunges at the door to the tank room and wrenches it open and plunges, screaming, into the tank room. Splashing ankle deep into the room, she, like Rosenberg and Parrish over at the far wall, gapes, stupefied at what is happening. The mass of substance seems to be assuming form. Stumps of arms and legs, misshapen and misplaced, bulge and recede. The substance itself changes color, bubbling and boiling as if cooked by an interior fire. Then it begins, a piercing, agonized scream. Emily's hysterical immobility is overcome as she hears this scream, and she splashes toward her husband. The room is cosmic black, pulsating with waves of force, shuddering bands of radiation and droning with energy. Jessup's form is recognizably human still, but seems caught in a pinch of energy waves. Temperature differences, changing his coloration from luminous white to foggy infrared, then burning red of ultraviolet radiation to blurred chiaroscuro blacks and grays, the quality of X-rays. Jessup's form appears to dissolve in shimmering vibrations, then suddenly swells until it distends into a sphere of gas. Shocking yellow gas turning red, collapsing back under the weight of its own gravity. His bowels erupt into flames, rekindling the maniacal carnage of colors, becoming white-hot. He begins to scream again, in terror, sinking to his knees as if he were melting, imploding as if he were being sucked into his own black hole. Emily flings herself upon this shuddering, shapeless antimatter and embraces her husband. Not 15 seconds have elapsed since the first explosion. In Emily's arms, Jessup's form throbs and cracks and resonates as he screams his primal shriek. His eyes stare blindly at some unspeakable horror. Then the fluctuating extensions that are almost the shape of arms flow out and unform themselves around his wife. They kneel together on the flooded floor Two terrified figures alone in the dense, black, spaceless drone of energy, clinging to each other against the horror of human origins. Abruptly, the demented hum of entropic forces stops. The cosmic black recedes, snatched away as Emily presses to her the entirely reconstituted naked form of her husband. They remain locked in their desperate embrace amid the wreckage of the tank room. Fragments of wood are everywhere, floating listlessly. Jessup is no longer screaming. There is no sound at all. The silence is palpable as Emily looks down at the ashen face resting on her breast, apparently in a coma. She turns her own harrowed face to Rosenberg and Parrish, lumbering to their feet, mutely asking them for help. Parrish sloshes over to her to disengage Jessup's limp form from Emily's embrace and carry it to the door. Myrtle Street, Jessup's house, 45 minutes later. Parrish's car pulls up to the curb. Between him and Emily, they get Jessup, now clothed, out of the car. Parrish carries him in total shock. Parrish carries him in total shock. Parrish, bring my bag. Emily reaches into the car for the doctor's bag and leads the way up the walk and opens the door. They go into Jessup's house, foyer and hallway, night. Carrying Jessup, Parrish follows Emily into Jessup's living room, bedroom. Emily turns on the lights for Parrish to bring Jessup to his bed. Parrish gets out his stethoscope, begins to take Jessup's pulse and examine him. Emily goes out into the living room and crosses it to the kitchen, where she rummages for the instant coffee. Dazed, she stands there in the middle of the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. Living room, 15 minutes later. Parrish sprawls on the couch, sipping from a mug that he rests on his stomach. Emily moves aimlessly around the room, verging on hysteria. Parrish, his signs are all good. He'll probably sleep a day or two, come out of it a little stuporous. He's got a whopping load of drugs in him. It's not uncommon for a psychedelic experience to whack you out for a couple of days. Emily, you'd hardly call this just a psychedelic experience. She goes into the bedroom. In the darkness, she looks down at her husband with his eyes closed. He is motionless and yet somehow not asleep. She turns back to the living room. Parrish. His heart's good. His pulse is good. His pressure's good. I'm more worried about you than I am about him. Emily sinks into the soft chair. I'm all right, Mason. Obviously, she's not. A spasm of shudders racks her, and she doubles forward in the grips of a cramp, her head on her knees, and she cries. Parrish slowly moves to her, placing a comforting hand on her back, and she starts to her feet like a frightened doe. Emily, crying out, of all the goddamned men in this world, why do I have to love this one? I can't get him out of me. Do you know how many men I tried to fall in love with this past year? But it won't work. No matter who I'm in bed with, I have to imagine it's him or nothing happens. No matter whom I'm eating with or walking with, there's always that pain because it isn't him. I'm possessed by him. It's crazy. Parrish. I think that's the way it's supposed to be. Emily. He doesn't give a damn about me. Parrish. Oh, Emily. You're the only thing he really cares about outside his work. She manages to remain contained, but the sensation of hysteria remains imminent. Emily. No, Mason. He's a truth lover. A god fucker. I was never real to him. Nothing in the human condition was ever real to him. Reality to Eddie is only that which is changeless, immutably constant. What happened to him tonight, that was Eddie's idea of love. That was consummation. He finally got it off with God. He finally embraced the absolute, was finally ravished by truth. And it fucking near destroyed him. On her feet again, she's yielding to the hysteria. He never loved me. You knew him as well as I did. We were all bits of transitory matter to him. She sits abruptly on the couch, frozen. Parrish observes her. Parrish, you're going into shock. I'm going to give you something. Foyer, several hours later. Rosenberg comes down the hall to the apartment, starts to ring the bell, thinks better, and knocks. Just as he's about to knock again, Parrish opens the door. Rosenberg. How is he? Parrish. Same. She's a wreck, though. Rosenberg. Who isn't? He goes into the living room. Emily is stretched out on the couch, resting but not asleep. Parrish. Did you get the place cleaned up? Rosenberg. Yeah. What a mess. Emily. There's sandwich stuff and coffee in the kitchen if you want anything, Arthur. Rosenberg. No, I'm okay. How are you doing? Emily. I'll be all right. I called Sylvia to tell her not to worry about you. Rosenberg. Thanks. He sits. Parrish sits. All are silent, subdued, still overwhelmed. All the lights are on, but it does little to relieve the tenebrous sensation that makes the air around them so dense. Rosenberg. Look, it's got to be said. What the three of us witnessed tonight was one of the most fantastic instances in the history of science. Analogous, perhaps, to the first time somebody looked through a microscope lens and discovered solid matter wasn't solid. We reached a point tonight where physical science just breaks down. We're in blue skies. Tonight was history. And what are we going to do about it? Parrish. I'm doing nothing about it. Tonight scared the hell out of me, and all I want to do is go home and go to sleep and wake up and forget about the whole goddamn thing. Rosenberg. Maybe you're right. Maybe we ought to drop it till tomorrow. He stands, goes into the kitchen, where he slaps together a cheese sandwich from what's on the table. But the suppressed excitement within him takes over, and he drops the sandwich and comes back into the living room. Rosenberg getting excited. That tank just blew up. Whatever happened inside that tank released a hell of a lot of energy. Parrish, flaring. For God's sake, let's drop the goddamn thing. I don't want to talk about it. Rosenberg, flaring back at him. I can't help it. You may want to go to sleep, but the way I feel right now, I don't expect to go to sleep for a year. I'm on fucking fire. I'm in there mopping up that goddamn tank room, and I've got to know why. Do you believe in supernatural agencies, Mason? Parrish. No. Rosenberg. But then what we saw tonight was a physical phenomenon. An inexplicable physical phenomenon. And if it's phenomenological, it's got to be explicable. And I've got to know why. Let me talk, for Christ's sakes. I've been in there mopping up that tank room for 3 hours, and I want to tell you what I'd like to do. Parrish. Arthur, I've had all I can take tonight. Just leave me alone. Rosenberg. We've got to repeat this. We've got to repeat this with other human subjects. We need a selective sample. We'll put up a notice for volunteers in the student union, something like that. Get 5 or 6 subjects and just go back to square one with them. Set up the doses of the drug in a graduated fashion. Check them against Eddie's values. I'll bet you we could even get a grant. We'll give them some kind of bullshit about checking this drug for renal clearance, some shit like that. Parrish, bellowing. God almighty, this is Arthur Rosenberg talking, right? The conscience of the scientific community. The guy with all the petitions against genetic engineering and protests against nuclear power. The big moral science for the people man. And here he is ready to test an untested drug on innocent human beings. Emily stands, cries out. Please stop shouting. Grumpy, the others subside. She moves across the room into the bedroom to see if all the yelling has had any effect on Jessup. He still lies motionless. She closes the door, darkening the room even more, and moves silently around the bed to raise the shade on the window, and to look into the sleeping backyards of the houses on the next street. She turns to look at her husband. Jessup has turned his head on the shadowy pillow, his eyes open. He is looking at her. She is momentarily immobilized by the fact that he is awake. They just look at each other. And she kneels on both knees by the bed and examines his long, ashen face. Emily, softly. How are you? Jessup, whispering. Wiped out. Emily, would you like to go back to sleep? Jessup, yes. Emily, would you mind if Mason had a quick look at you? Jessup, can barely whisper. Good idea. His eyes close. She gets to her feet, gently touches his face, and goes to get Parrish. She opens the door to the living room. Emily, he's awake. Maybe you ought to have a look at him, Mason. The bedroom, hours later, 6 a.m. day. The shade on the window is up, and the gray, passionless light of dawn filters into the room. On the bed, Jessup awakens. Eyes open, he lies there letting the sanity of daylight enter him. The living room door is open, but the apartment is utterly still. He sits up, moves his legs over the side of the bed, and stands. He seems okay. Barefoot and wearing the t-shirt and jeans he had slept in, he goes to the living room. From the doorway, he looks into the living room. Rosenberg and Parrish are obviously gone. His wife lies sleeping on the couch under a twisted blanket, her leg protruding. The blinds are drawn, and she seems very white in the stillness. Her face is drawn in pain, and her sleep seems not a pleasant one. Reaction shot on Jessup, filled with solicitude. He brushes away a tear from his face. Moving to the stuffed chair opposite her, he sinks into it and watches her. She turns in her sleep and the blanket slips onto the floor. She curls up into herself in an automatic reaction to the chill of her nakedness. He gets up, crosses the room, and picks up the blanket to cover her again. Then, lifting her head, he squeezes onto the couch under her, taking her into his arms, warming her with himself. She shudders and, still desperately asleep, begins to whimper and cry. Emily suddenly clutches at him out of the terror of her own nightmare, fevered by some frightened sensuality, making strangulated cries and arching panic-stricken up within his embrace. Her cheeks are streaked with tears, her eyes clenched closed, and she is sucking at his mouth with the rapacity of a vampire. He locks her in his arms. Quickly, the moment is over. Her head sinks back onto his chest, then into his lap, and again into sleep. The kitchen, 2 hours later, day. Jessup sits at the kitchen table eating a sandwich and sipping coffee. His legs are crossed, and he is in the depths of thought. The sun is higher and brighter now, breaking through the slats of the window blind. The phone rings. It takes a moment for the sound of the living room to penetrate Jessup's mind. It rings again, and he starts from his seat, moving to the living room, day. Emily is already sitting up. She smiles briefly at him and sighs. Emily. Oh God, I hope it isn't the kids. She stands and crosses the room, gray-style, shamelessly naked except for her almost indiscernible panties. Picks up the phone, ending its third ring, and perches on the arm of the chair. Emily, on phone, listens. Everything's fine, Arthur. He's fine. To Jessup. It's Arthur. Are you fine? Jessup nods, goes back into the kitchen. Emily, on phone. I was sleeping. No, I don't know if he's eaten anything. She looks up as Jessup returns from the kitchen, bringing her a mug of coffee. She nods her thank you. Emily, to Jessup. Arthur, the indestructible Jewish mother, wants to know, have you eaten anything? Jessup. Yes. Emily, on phone. Arthur, I'll call you back when I'm more awake. Everything's fine. She hangs up, notes the sun fragmenting itself through the blinds. Emily. God, what time is it? I should call the kids. Eddie, could you throw that blanket over here? I'm freezing. Jessup. I love you, Emily. Emily. You said that last night too, you know. Jessup. I know. Emily. I think those have been the first unsolicited words of love you've ever said to me. Jessup. I love you. I love the kids. I can't tell you how much the three of you mean to me. How much I need you. I just wanted you to know that. Emily. Why don't you just come back to us? Jessup. It's too late. He picks up the fallen blanket, brings it to her, tucks it around her. She tries to read his face. Jessup. The point is, what happened last night was more of a religious experience than a scientific one. Emily. Yes, I know. Jessup returns to his corner of the couch where it's darker. The widening shaft of sunlight divides them. Jessup. You saved me. You redeemed me from the pit. I was in it, Emily. I was in that ultimate moment of terror that is the beginning of life. I found the final truth. I found it, touched it, ate of its flesh, drank its blood. I've seen it face to face, and it's hideous. It's insufferable. The pain cannot be described. It is nothing. Simple, hideous nothing. The final truth of all things is that there is no final truth. Truth is what's transitory. It's human life that is real. This is real. You and me sitting in this room. That is real. That is substance. That is the only truth there is. He emerges out of the cuculate shadows to stand in the band of dust-moted white light streaking across the floor from the slatted window. Jessup, I'm trying to tell you why I love you. That without you, I would have disappeared into unspeakable terror. She stands, pulling the blanket around her. Emily, I suppose that's why anybody loves anyone. Jessup, for God's sake, Emily, don't be so facile. Emily, I'm not being facile. My God, do you think you're the only one who has experienced despair? The only one who has experienced the nothingness of life? We are all creatures of despair, Eddie. Life for all of us is a flight from the unspeakable terror. Life is an act of faith for all of us. It's why we love each other. It's the only act of faith most of us are capable of. At least it's the only act of faith I'm capable of. Jessup, I can't live with it, Emily. The pain is unbearable. Emily, we all live with it. That unspeakable terror is what makes us such singular creatures. We hide from it. We succumb to it. Mostly we defy it. We build fragile little structures to keep it out. We love. We raise families. We work. We make friends. We write poems. We paint pictures. We build beautiful things. We make our own universe, our own truth, our own reality. And every now and then, someone like you comes along who goes out and challenges it face to face. Passionate men, poets, philosophers, saints, and scientists. What the hell do you think makes me love you so much? Jessup, I don't want to frighten you, Emily, but what I'm trying to tell you is what happened to me last night can happen at any time. Even now, right now, while I'm talking to you. The drug I've been using must have a latency factor. I don't know how much of it has accumulated in my limbic nuclei. It could be self-perpetuating. The chemical potential is there. I've attained a critical mass. Any act of consciousness could kick it off. Because whatever act of consciousness occurred last night is embedded in me just as much as the drug is. So it could happen at any time. They stare at each other. He is crying openly, his face glistening with tears. Jessup, it's too late, you see? He slowly raises his right arm and extends it for her to see. The vivid sunlight bleaches into a sepulchrally white limb where a bulge of protoplasmic substance moves under the skin like a mole. She stares, stunned. We hear a hum resonating. the throbbing sound of the pulsating primal energy we had heard the night before. Emily screams, "Defy it, Eddie. You made it real, you can make it unreal. If you love me, Eddie, defy it." He stands immobilized, crying helplessly. His body rumbles, cracks, and buckles, as if forces inside were about to break through the surface. He begins to change forms, some recognizable, some merely monstrous. His substance seems not more real than a photograph, a projected illusion, a demented kaleidoscope of instant, transitory, transparent images, flickering madly in the wide shaft of sunlight. The drone has become unbearable. She clutches her ears. She sees a quick, fleeting image of her husband reaching out his arms to her for help, but she is petrified. His arms turn to stumps. She finally forces out a hissing, sibilant sound. Emily, barely a whisper. "If you love me, Eddie." Suddenly she has convulsed herself, clutching at her stomach as some pain explodes within her. Her arms bulge and swell and discolor. A jagged crack appears on her forearm and shoots up the length of her arm as if it were splitting open. She forces her arm up as if to show it to her husband. It is now a stump, and losing its definition as the lines become wave-like and melt into the shrieking air. She feels a massive shock just inside her skull above her eyes. A red-hot flame erupts from her bowels. She seems to be burning alive. Her eyes disappear. She would scream, but her mouth has disappeared as well. The screen has become total, impenetrable blackness. We hear a distant echo of a scream, light years away in the ultimate blackness. It grows louder, but is no longer a scream. It is now rather a roar of rage, the fury of a raging animal. Light begins to penetrate the darkness. Forms begin to take shape. Jessup's human form, flickering in and out of the madness of all his other shapes, reasserts itself. The blackness is now gone, and we are back in the living room. Jessup stands, a completely human form again, naked, as immobile and marbled as a statue stark white. He looks at his wife and sees her disintegrating into the shapeless antimatter that had been his condition the night before. With a shocking wrench of effort, he takes a step toward her, forcing himself into the human who will take one step, two, reaching out to embrace the shapelessness of his wife. Instantly, abruptly, it is over. The drone, the lunacy of illusion, the whole shattering moment is done. What we see, standing in the sunlight in the middle of their living room, is a young married couple. He, a slight, light-haired man of 37, beginning to bald just a bit but looking boyish at the moment in his jeans and t-shirt with a slim, gracefully naked young woman, her face pressed against her husband. Her arms are wrapped around his waist, a pair of young, living humans standing embraced in the white sunlight of their living room. Jessup, after a moment. I love you, Emily. The end.